Hello everyone and welcome to Notorious Yu-Gi-Oh! I am Notorious Cly, and this is a Resonator Red Dragon Archfiend deck profile for Fire format. This format is currently dominated by anything and everything Snake Eyes. Woohoo! Currently the top two variants of Snake Eyes, Pure and Fire King, demand every other deck in the format either run as many hand traps as possible or have a playstyle that invalidates all the hand traps being played. This is rather unfortunate for Red Dragon Archfiend because Red Dragon Archfiend is very vulnerable to hand traps at the Crimson Resonator choke point. Failing to resolve Crimson Resonator's effect to special summon other Resonators is a big issue for the strategy, as it struggles to pivot into meaningful interaction after that. It's not all doom and gloom though. I do believe the deck can be built to fit some of the format's demands. Before we get started with the deck profile, I wanted to go over some foundational ideas or goals behind the deck you're about to see. 1. Maximize the consistency of the Soul Resonator 1 or 1.5 card combo. 2. Reduce the engine down to the essentials to maximize deck space. 3. Use the additional space in the main deck to play as many hand traps or cards that beat hand traps as possible. 4. Build the deck for Fire format, while acknowledging the other decks that I expect to see at my locals. With all that being said, let's jump into our deck profile, starting with our Resonator engine. We are playing 3 copies of Soul Resonator, 1 copy of Crimson Resonator, 2 copies of Vision Resonator, and 1 Synchron Resonator. We're playing 3 copies of Soul Resonator because it's the heart and soul of the deck. Soul is our main playmaker, combo starter, and what allows us to build our deck in the way I'm presenting here. On normal or special summon, it can search any level 4 or lower fiend. This means the tuner in Soul can always find the non-tuner it needs to synchro summon. If we happen to already have our non-tuner, we can use the Soul Search to grab any of our other Resonators or utility fiends. Soul quite literally does everything for this deck. 1 copy of Crimson Resonator may seem odd to some, since resolving its second effect is the single most important thing we can do on our turn, but I assure you that there's solid reasoning for it. Typically, you play cards at more than 1 copy when you want to see them in your opening hand. We don't necessarily need to see Crimson in our opening hand, since the Soul combos easily allow us to work Crimson into rotation. Additionally, seeing Crimson in our opening hand and using it as a combo starter requires us to play a significant number of non-tuners to pair with it. One of the foundational ideas behind this deck was to maximize space for non-engine. Playing Crimson as a combo piece instead of a combo starter helps enable that. Also, we're technically playing multiple copies of Crimson Resonator, thanks to the abundance of searching that we have. If we ever want to start a combo with Crimson, we should have a reasonable ability to do so. The only time when a second hard copy of Crimson Resonator really comes up is if it's banished by a Bestial or a Deity Crow or something like that. It's important to remember though that in that situation, the second copy of Crimson Resonator likely would do us no good on that turn. It would be for the follow-up turn. Still love Crimson, it's still my boy, but I figured we should try to do something new this format. Vision is a valuable piece of our engine, granting access to archetypical spells and traps, ones that specifically mention Red Dragon Archfiend. If Vision is sent to the graveyard, you can go ahead and search them. Playing Vision at only 2 copies helps us thread the needle for 2 of our deck goals, minimizing our engine while attempting to maximize consistency. Reducing our engine to only the essentials would allow us to play 1 Vision, since we usually only want to access it off Crimson Resonator. The second copy is played for consistency. Occasionally we will need to find a roundabout way to send Vision to the graveyard, so we can access Crimson Gaia, a card that also searches Soul Resonator. I think it's worth mentioning that Vision can also be used as a conditional extender when combo lines are stopped, turning an otherwise useless Red Rising Dragon into a Red Dragon Archfiend or a Red Dragon Archfiend variant that helps us squeeze extra utility or interaction out of our archetypical spells and traps. Synchron is only played at 1 copy here because 1 is all you really ever need. You only ever hope to summon it off of Crimson Resonator. Occasionally, you can use Synchron kind of like Vision as a conditional extender to turn one of your level 8 Dark Dragon Synchros into Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss. However, I've found that this niche use doesn't really warrant the inclusion of a second copy of Synchron, even though it would technically increase the consistency of hard opening Synchron. In these situations, I've found it much more valuable to use the myriad of Resonator searchers that we have at our disposal to find Synchron if we need to extend in that way. And speaking of Resonator searchers, we play a lot of them. All of the following cards' primary purpose is to search Soul Resonator. However, they are not limited to just searching Soul. Each one of these cards grants us a little bit of extra utility, or searchability. We have 3 copies of Earthbound Prisoner Stone Sweeper, 3 copies of Resonator Call, 3 Crimson Gaia, and 1 Foolish Burial. That is 10 ways to search Soul Resonator. 10. These 10 cards, plus our 3 copies of Soul Resonator, give us incredible consistency for our 1.5 card combos. For those of you who don't know, the half card in any half card combo is any other card in your hand. So when I say the Soul Resonator 1.5 card combo, what I'm saying is we need Soul Resonator and literally any other card in our deck. In this deck, I'm playing 41 cards. 13 copies of Soul in a 41 card deck equals an 87% chance to open our main combo. In the event we don't open our main combo, I believe we're playing enough interactive non-engine to potentially give us another turn. If we happen to open a variety of our searchers, it's also no big deal. As I mentioned earlier, each one of these has a secondary target or purpose. Stone Sweeper can be discarded from your hand to search any level 3 or lower Fiend Tuner, aka any Resonator. It can also special summon itself if there's a field spell in play. This effect is unlikely to come up because I'm not playing a field spell. Resonator Call is very easy to explain. It searches any Resonator, and it's not once per turn. Crimson Gaia can add any card that mentions Red Dragon Archfiend from our deck or graveyard to the hand. This obviously includes Soul, but it also includes our Archetypical spells and traps or Vision Resonator. But wait, there's more. Included in the wall of text on Crimson Gaia is actually a ton of utility. Gaia can also return Red Dragon Archfiend from the graveyard to the extra deck, giving the deck a near endless supply of synchro monsters. But wait, there's even more! Gaia can summon a Red Dragon Archfiend from graveyard if a card on the field is destroyed by battle or card effect. And we're not even done yet, there's even more. When Red Dragon Archfiend attacks, Gaia can flip all of your opponent's monsters face down. This turns the OG Red Dragon Archfiend into a Regeki, and any other monster that happens to become Red Dragon Archfiend while it's on the field, to an even bigger offensive threat than it already was. Crimson Gaia is the card that helps Red Dragon Archfiend the most in the grind game, continuously providing synchro monsters, synchro material, big bodies on board, and offensive pressure. Last up, we just need to talk about Foolish Burial. Foolish gives us a nifty way to find Soul Resonator. Foolish Burial can send Vision to graveyard, Vision's effect will trigger, allowing us to search Gaia, and then Gaia can search Soul. Like the rest of the card in this grouping though, Foolish isn't limited to being just a Soul Resonator searcher. There are a handful of cards in this deck that can be retrieved from the graveyard via Gaia that grant a beneficial effect by being in the graveyard, or can play themselves out of the graveyard. Soul Resonator, while in the graveyard, can protect cards we control from being destroyed, provided we control Red Dragon Archfiend or a synchro monster that mentions it. Vision Resonator is an easy target to recycle off of Crimson Gaia on later turns. And the other 2 main targets for Foolish are the next 2 cards we're going to be going over. We have 3 Bone Archfiend and 1 Obsessive Oovaloop. These 2 are the non-Resonator part of our engine. Bone Archfiend is Soul's primary search target because it can special summon itself from hand or graveyard, and while in the field it can target a monster, send a Fiend Tuner from deck to graveyard, and modulate the targeted monster's level up or down by 1. Bone's big role in the deck and our combos is to put Crimson Resonator into the graveyard, setting it up for Red Rising Dragon, and to change Soul's level from 3 to 2, enabling us to synchro summon Red Rising Dragon. One of the best things about Bone is its ability to summon itself from the graveyard. Once you work Bone into rotation, you should have a non-tuner for the rest of the duel. I'm playing Bone at 3 copies even though it's searchable, because seeing it in the open hand frees up Soul to search other combo pieces or enhancers, and seeing it in the opener means it's okay if Soul Search effect is interrupted. For what it's worth, Bone also plays pretty nice with the rest of our Resonators, since it can special summon itself and modulate the Resonator's level to fit the situation. Obsessive Oovaloop isn't always available for combos, but when it is, it does a lot of heavy lifting. Oovaloop, while in the hand, can banish a synchro monster from the field or graveyard to special summon itself, and while in the graveyard, can banish a synchro monster from the field or graveyard to add itself back to the hand. Oovaloop is a level 4 tuner, which does matter in some situations, but its most important function is putting Dark Dragon Synchros into banishment for key endboard pieces like Bastille the Spotter or Red Zone. I'm only playing the 1 copy of Oovaloop because it's a combo enhancer, not a combo maker. Seeing just Oovaloop doesn't do a whole lot to us. Seeing Oovaloop on top of our existing combo does do a whole lot for us. The last part of the engine we need to cover is the searchable traps in Red Zone and Fiendish Golem. These are searchable both by Gaia and Vision. And friendly reminder, Gaia is also searchable by Vision, and Vision is also searchable by Gaia. Each one of these is pretty good, and provides a different bit of interaction and utility to our end board. Fiendish Golem is a card I wasn't too high on when it was first released. I was really sad it was a normal trap instead of a quick play spell, but it's grown on me as time has gone. Fiendish Golem allows you to target a monster with 2000 war attack, and banish it until the end phase of the next turn, effectively removing it from the duel. Fiendish Golem's primary purpose, other than being non-destruction removal, is to put stuff in the banishment for the effect of Bestialist Potter, or occasionally it can put our own stuff in the banishment for something like Red Zone. Red Zone can special summon a banished Dark Dragon Synchro monster. This allows us to recur stuff that it's been banished off of Fiendish Golem or Obsessive Oovaloop, and allows us to double up on the ever-powerful Red Supernova Dragon's effect. Red Zone also has another interactive effect, Interruptive Effect. While we control Red Dragon Archfiend, when our opponent activates a card or effect, we can destroy one card on the field. Red Zone being a searchable interruption that constantly threatens big bodies, and the doubling up of Red Supernova, does a lot for the deck. And that's going to be it for our engine. We will now move on to non-engine. And before we move on, I would like to echo goal number 4 for the deck. Build a deck for Fire format while acknowledging the other decks I expect to see at my locals. Red Dragon Archfiend is not a deck I would feel super comfortable taking to a YCS or other high-level event, but it is something that I think is incredibly fun and cool to play at locals. With that being said, that's the event I want to build my deck for. Copying, pasting all of the best non-engine or the best staples from another deck or even another version of Red Dragon Archfiend may not always translate one-to-one. If everybody at a regional is playing Snake Eyes and Snake Eyes variants, but everybody at your locals is playing Rogue and off meta because they've been priced out of the meta, you may find some of the deck building choices a little underwhelming. With that being said, we have 3 copies of Ash Blossom, 3 copies of Infinite Permanence, 2 copies of Fact Veiler, 3 copies of Joel and Lockbird, 2 copies of Nibiru, and 2 Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. This rounds out the hand trap portion of our non-engine. As you can see, we are playing 15 hand traps, which is quite a bit. The goal of playing 15 hand traps is to attempt to draw 2 of them so we can shut our opponent's turn down and then dominate with our Resonator engine. I feel like these are all pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to quickly go over each card and why I decided to play it. I played Ash Blossom because it's one of the most versatile cards we have. It's decent into almost every matchup and really good in some specific matchups, such as Branded or Labyrinth. Infinite Permanence and Effect Veiler are much the same as Ash Blossom. They're almost always useful. I don't ever expect them to shut down my opponent's turn, but when I pair them up with any of the other hand traps they're playing, they can really start to do some damage. I'm playing 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird and 2 copies of Nibiru the Primate Being because they are heavy-hitting hand traps. They may not always be live, but when they do resolve, they have devastating effects for our opponent. Even more so when you compare them up with any other one of the hand traps we have here. Resolving a Nibiru plus a Droll or a Nibiru plus an Imperm usually means it's the end of your opponent's turn. I'm playing 3 Droll and 2 Nibiru because I feel more decks at my local scene have a hard time into Droll and Lockbird, while they have ways to play around or into or through Nibiru. Lastly, I'm playing 2 copies of Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion because Labyrinth and Fire Kings, the non-Snake Eyes variant, are 2 decks I expect to see at the local level. Labyrinth is a fan favorite, being the best trap deck of the current format, and Fire King was made available to newer and budget players by being included in a structure deck. Conveniently, these are also all hand traps that Red Dragon Archfiend can struggle with, and there are some cards in my side deck that help address that. Cards in the main deck that I put in there to help address hand traps that we'd be playing against are 2 copies of Triple Tactics Talent and 1 Called by the Grave. Called by Grave is a power card that invalidates most hand traps, and it can be good as a turn 1 set and used as an interruption on your opponent's turn. Triple Tactics Talent is less good at invalidating hand traps and better at punishing our opponent for using them. 1 hand trap used at the Crimson Resonator choke point will shut down our mainline combo. However, depending on what the rest of my hand looks like, talents may give us exactly what we need to win. If I'm staring at 2 or potentially 3 or even 4 hand traps in my hand, I'm going to use the effective talents after we are interrupted to look at my opponent's hand remove their most important card, and then know exactly how to use the rest of the cards in my hand. If I'm looking at a hand with 1 hand trap or even 0 hand traps, I'm probably going to use Talent's Effect to draw after we're interacted with, to hope to draw into any one of the 15 hand traps we are playing. I would really like to play a 3rd copy of Talents, but I don't have a 3rd copy right now, and keeping the deck at 41 cards seemed pretty good. With 13 ways to find Soul Resonator, I feel pretty confident building this deck up to 44 cards, but I elected to keep it closer to 40 because I wanted to see power cards like Called by the Grave and Talents more. And that's going to be it for the main deck. Let's go ahead and move on to the extra deck really quick. First up, we have 3 copies of Red Rising Dragon. Red Rising is the piece that gets us started on our Synchro Crime. It's a level 6 Dark Dragon Synchro that can resummon one of your Resonators from graveyard, most commonly Crimson Resonator, and from there we can just keep on laddering. Next up, we have Scar Red Dragon Archfiend, which is an incredible card. Scar Red is both a combo piece and an offensive pressure tool. If Scar Red is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can special summon a Red Dragon Archfiend from your extra deck. This means that Scar Red is a body we can use as synchro material and have it replace itself. If we happen to use Scar Red as synchro material while our opponent has monsters on their board though, we can go ahead and destroy all monsters they control in attack position, provided, again, that the Scar Red was used as synchro material. To accommodate Scar Red's floating effect, we're playing 2 copies of the original Red Dragon Archfiend. Don't mind the ghost rare. I like playing 2 copies of the OG because I enjoy having 1 to float into on my turn while I'm comboing, and then 1 to float into on my opponent's turn if Scar Red is part of our end board or find its way back to the field off of something like a Crimson Gaia. Next up, I'm playing 1 copy of Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend. Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, much like Scar Red Dragon Archfiend, becomes Red Dragon Archfiend while it's on the field, which allows us to squeeze all the extra utility out of our typical spells and traps. Scarlet is here as a one-of, just because it's a good toolbox monster in grindier game states when wiping the board becomes pivotal. Continuing on with our Red Dragon Archfiend and Red Dragon Archfiend variants, we have Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, quite possibly one of the best boss monsters in the extra deck, and one we're looking to make as often as possible. That's why I'm playing 2. I really enjoy having 1 to make on the setup turn, and then 1 to make up on the following turn if our opponent manages to go through the trouble of outing the first one. Then we have 1 copy of Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Bane. Bane is a big body that can also help get Red Dragon Archfiend monsters, so any of these guys, excluding Red Rising Dragon, back onto the field. Then we're playing 1 copy of the original Red Nova Dragon. Red Nova Dragon is here because it's part of one of the Soul 1.5 card variants, and Red Nova Dragon specifically mentions Red Dragon Archfiend, meaning it qualifies for the Red Dragon Archfiend or a synchro monster that mentions it claws on all of our archetypical spells and traps. Red Dragon Archfiend is mentioned as Red Nova Dragon's synchro material requirement. In addition to all that, Red Nova Dragon is just a big dude that is immune to our opponent's destruction effects and can invalidate one of their attacks. Not bad utility for a card printed so long ago. Rounding out our Red Dragon Archfiend and Red Dragon Archfiend variants, we have the biggest, baddest boss monster of them all, Red Supernova Dragon. Red Supernova Dragon is a game-winningly strong card. When your opponent activates a monster effect or declares an attack, you can banish Red Supernova Dragon and then banish all cards your opponent controls. Friendly reminder that this is a soft once per turn, meaning you can use the effect of Red Supernova Dragon once per turn per copy of Red Supernova Dragon you have. This means if you have Red Supernova Dragon, banish it to use its effect, and then use something like a Red Zone to bring it back, you can then use the Red Supernova Dragon effect again. Resolving Red Supernova once is usually strong enough to win the game. Resolving it twice further guarantees the victory. The next few pieces on our extra deck can be devoted to any number of cards. Usually here you'll see 2 choices made, either continuing playing nothing but Dark Dragon Synchros, or trying to access the generic Synchro toolbox. For this particular deck build, I elected to keep with the Dark Dragon Synchro toolbox because I enjoy having as much of my extra deck as accessible as possible at all times. The first toolbox monster I'm playing is Corbelt the Blade Dragon. Sometimes you just need a level 7, and this happens to be the best level 7 Dark Dragon Synchro. On Synchro Summon, it can destroy a card. Not bad. Then I'm playing 1 Void Ogre Dragon. Void Ogre is in here because, as I mentioned earlier, Labyrinth is one of the matchups that I expect to be pretty common in my local scene. Having a Spell or Trap negate, even a conditional one, is pretty good for that matchup. The last monster in the extra deck is going to be Bestialdus Potter. This is less of a toolbox monster and more of a preferred endboard piece. Fistfieldless Potter may not be the most accessible card due to its price tag, and I think decks without it are perfectly fine. Going for Supernova Turbo is hardly a bad thing. It can special summon a banished light or dark monster to your field, and then it has two variants of the same effect. When your opponent activates a monster effect, you can return a banished monster from the banishment to the deck, and then do one of two things. If you returned your card from the banishment to the deck, you can destroy that monster. If you returned your opponent's, you can negate that effect. That's it for the extra deck, and now we're going to move on to our side deck. Again, a lot of these choices were made with my locals in mind. They may not fit your locals, but hopefully this can at least give you some ideas of cards you should be considering to play. One card that I do believe isn't local specific, and is good in this deck generically, and good in the format we're in, is Crossout Designator. This deck is a little vulnerable to hand traps. Crossout Designator gives us a chance to play through hand traps. There's also one additional crossout target that I have in my side deck here, and it's because there are some players at my locals that love to Dimensional Barrier, call Synchro against me. Being able to negate the effect of my opponent's Dimensional Barrier when I'm going second via Crossout Designator is wonderful. Dimensional Barrier also has the added versatility of not being a bad card to side in when I'm going first and set if I happen to draw it. Next up, we have 3 Cosmic Cyclone. Cosmic is generically good this format, also good in the Labyrinth matchup, and has its uses against the most common floodgate being played this format, Summon Limit. Speaking of Summon Limit, its existence in this format has prompted me to try something new. Archfiend Eccentric is a Fiend type monster that is level 4 or lower, meaning it is searchable by Soul Resonator. If we have access to Soul Resonator and happen to open Bone Archfiend, we can always use Soul Resonator search effect to search Archfiend Eccentric and give us an easy, accessible out to a summon limit. Moving on to another card I'm trying out, Skullmeister. Skullmeister happens to be pretty good against the Fire King matchup, specifically the budget deck version. And as I mentioned before, that's something that I would be preparing for at my locals. Skullmeister, like Eccentric, also has the added benefit of being searchable via Soul Resonator. Next up, I have 2 copies of DD Crow, just because it's generically good in some matchups, and it's also not bad in the format. Being able to DD Crow your opponent's Promethean Princess out of the grave feels really great. Additionally, it can be used to hit something like a transaction rollback out of your opponent's grave before they have the ability to activate it. That's right, I'm heavily cited for Labyrinth. Continuing on with that theme, we have the 3rd copy of Ghostbell and Haunted Mansion. Another card I have in the side deck just to round out the playset is Nibiru. If Nibiru happens to be good in a specific matchup, and another hand trap I'm playing in the main deck doesn't, it's an easy 1-for-1 swap. The last 2 cards in my side deck, again, are cards that are specific to the matchups I expect to be playing. They are 2 copies of Book of Moon. After Kashtira Rise Heart was banned, and the Kashtira core was reprinted in Megaton, Kashtira became very accessible, and there were a handful of people at my locals who managed to pick it up. Kashtira is also not a bad anti-meta pick in this meta, so I should be expecting to see some Kashtira. Also, there are a handful of Pearly players, and Book of Moon can really help out with that matchup. That's going to be it for the deck profile, everybody. Thanks again for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one. Be safe, have fun, everybody.